Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this session on Sam Dalrymple's fascinating debut, Shattered Lands, Five Partitions, and the Making of Modern Asia. As the subtitle says, it's a story of how the British Indian Empire that stretched from Yemen in the west to Burma in the east in the 1920s. It got shattered over 5 decades into 12 nation states. But alongside the grand history, Sam's book is also full of wonderful portraits of a wide cast of characters, about which we'll shortly talk. Shattered Lands was one of the most talked about books of 2025, and it was named among the best books of the year or the most notable books of the year in quite literally dozens of newspapers and magazines and journals across the world. So here is how we've decided to structure our session. Sam will do a presentation. Thereafter, we are going to have a little bit of chat, and then hopefully we'll have enough time, and then we'll take questions from the audience. I think that sounds good. Okay. So over to you, Sam. Is the video ready?
Yeah. Hello. Could we get the PowerPoint? Okay, how do I change slides? Where do I point this? Oh, it's not... could the team go to next slide, please? Yeah. Hello? Could we... here we go. So the story that I'm going to be telling you about over the next half hour or so, before we move into the conversational part of this talk, is the story of how borders erupted across the landscape of South Asia over the course of just 5 decades in the mid-20th century. And I wanted to open this talk with this rather extraordinary image that you can see here, this strange fact that I think many of us grow up with this idea that you can see the Great Wall of China from space. In fact, it's a complete myth. And even if you were to squint your eyes from the International Space Station, you would not be able to see a thing. And that's because there is only a single wall visible from space, and that is the India-Pakistan border. You can see Karachi, bottom left, and on the right side of this scar visibly torn onto the landscape, on the right side I think you can see Jaisalmer and Barmer, that's Rajasthan on the right-hand side. This is an extraordinary scar created to divide Hindus from Muslims that is now visible from space. And it's about 3,000 kilometers long. It goes from the Arabian Sea as far north. It turns into the line of control as it enters Kashmir. And it peters off near K2, the second highest point on planet Earth. And what's extraordinary is today there are nuclear armadas either side. You know, just this May, India and Pakistan almost went to war over this border. And this isn't even the only heavily militarized border in this way in South Asia. If you head a bit further east to the India-Bangladesh border, you'll actually find the longest border wall on planet Earth. Doesn't look like it from a map, but it actually wiggles its way so haphazardly through the Bengal Delta that there are more kilometers of border fence in Bangladesh rather, than anywhere else on planet Earth. And you go a bit further east from that, you reach the India-Myanmar border. This is actually the longest border wall currently under construction, beating even Trump's US-Mexico border in terms of sheer kilometers of fencing. Now, what's extraordinary is that if you go back 100 years ago today, not a single one of these borders existed. 100 years ago today, the Raj is at its height, British India. The Victoria Memorial has been opened in Kolkata. That's the building on the left, made in marble, the same marble that the Taj Mahal was built out of, but using the architecture of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, meant to visibly represent Britain succeeding the Mughal Empire as the rulers of the subcontinent. And of course in Delhi, the largest architectural ensemble that the British Empire ever built is being built in the form of Lutyens Delhi. Now, the main thing that I want to get across to you in the next half hour is the fact that the India that exists 100 years ago today, specifically the day that the Indian National Congress first sets out its aim for complete national independence from India. That's in early 1928. On this day, India is almost 2.5 times the size that it is today. And there is no image that better demonstrates this than the image you see here. This is an Indian Empire passport, not British India, Indian Empire. That means all of British India plus the princely states, plus the semi-independent states like Jaipur, ruled by Maharajas, Nawabs, etc., that were also under the orbit of the Raj. What people don't often realize is quite how far this Indian empire stretched. This passport was issued in the city of Aden, in what's now Yemen. Yemen was the city of Aden in Yemen was the westernmost city of British India. It was part of the Bombay Presidency. And this woman, Mariam Awad, was a Yemeni Jewish woman who was trying to migrate to Jerusalem after the Balfour Declaration. And by virtue of being Yemeni, she was legally an Indian, because at that time, all residents of South Yemen were legally Indian citizens. This is the list of princely states protectorates like Jaipur. Fascinatingly, it opens alphabetically with Abu Dhabi and goes on to list states like Bhutan. And if you look at the images from the Delhi Darbars, you'll actually see princes from as far afield as Burma, top right. And when you put this all together, this is the map that we are so unfamiliar with today. But this is the map of the Raj 100 years ago today. It stretches from about 1/3 of the Arabian Peninsula, including Dubai, Qatar, Kuwait. Aden, as you can see, is its westernmost city. And it stretches as far east as the borders of Thailand. Red is British India, and yellow is princely India. And the story that I'm going to be telling you is how 5 partitions transformed this map into this one. 12 nation states will emerge by 1975. These are Yemen, Oman, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and Myanmar. It's a much vaster story than we tend to realize, and it's one that creates so many of the conflicts we see today, everything from the Rohingya genocide to conflicts in Kashmir, Balochistan, Northeast India, civil war in Yemen, even the Gulf War and Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait can be understood by looking at the 5 partitions that tear this region apart. And it all begins, rather unexpectedly, in India's largest and richest province, and that is Burma. Burma is not a place that we tend to associate with India today, but a short walk around Yangon, or Rangoon, as it was then known, shows you how integrated it was at the time. I was there just a few weeks ago, and within a few minutes, there's no city that is more like Kolkata on the planet. And within 4 minutes, you can walk from the largest synagogue in Southeast Asia through the Tamil Hindu Bazaar, past the Chulia Dargah, which is the Tamil Dargah, and end up at the Armenian church. Burma was, or Rangoon specifically, was the New York of the 1920s. It actually overtakes New York in 1933 as the largest emigration port in the world. The Burmese dream overtakes the American dream. And again, this history has been largely forgotten, but it lies there unexpectedly in pop culture. So, for example, there's that famous Bollywood song, Mera Piya Gaye Rangoon, which is all about the Piya going off to Rangoon in search of work. Why is he going there? Because it's the richest and largest province of the Raj. It features again and again, but in ways that people don't quite know where to place historically. And it's so popular, in fact, that there are more people moving there that it creates the kind of 1930s version of Brexit. Burma is increasingly, like the indigenous Burmese people are increasingly pushed out of jobs. In order to get anywhere in Burmese industry, you have to speak either Tamil, Bengali, or Hindi. Burmese is the 5th most popular language for business in the country, after English, then Hindi, Bangla, and Tamil, which means that increasingly people feel pushed out. Society divides down the middle over whether, not independence from Britain, but whether they should be separated from India, made into a separate British colony with a new international border dividing them. And what's remarkable is at the time how controversial this was. Today we see it as a somewhat natural divide, but this is a newspaper article from The Scotsman, and it says that this attitude towards the separation question is one which strikes deep into the very existence of India itself as an entity. If one province breaks loose, no reason can be shown why similar claims by others should not be granted. And then the most surprising bit at the bottom, insofar as Burma is an integral part of India, she has no greater claim than any other part to a divorce. Again, this is a world that we've forgotten where Burma is seen as an integral part of the Indian nation. And politicians themselves are divided. So on the left, you have Mahatma Uttama. He is Vinayak Savarkar's predecessor as president of the Hindu Mahasabha, the only Burmese Buddhist to hold the role. And he spends the second half of his career arguing fervently that Burma is an integral part of India. But he falls out with his former mentor, Gandhi, because Gandhi arrives and says, this is not Bharatvarsh. This is not part of the sacred geography of the subcontinent as laid out in the ancient Mahabharata epics. And increasingly in the 1920s, Hindu nationalists and Indian nationalists more broadly are using the geography of the sacred epics to suggest what the geography of a future nation state should be like. And Gandhi and many others are arguing that Burma and Arabia should be separated as a result, because they do not feature in the epics. It's rather like if after getting independence from the Ottomans, Greece was to try and demand the contours of its nation state to be based off the Odyssey or the Iliad. Right. And here we go. This is the sacred geography of Bharat Mata as it's envisioned at the time. And so on April Fool's Day 1937, the first partition of India ruptures its way through the landscape, separating off Burma. And as we'll see, this will form the basic precedent for every other partition to come. And most importantly, it leads to a mass exodus. A bunch of anti-immigration politicians take over in Burma afterwards, notably this guy U Saw, who later assassinates Aung San Suu Kyi's father. He not only adds the Rohingya to a list of Indian communities that need to be expelled from Burma, laying the seeds for the Rohingya genocide a century later, but leads a series of pogroms against the Indian population, so that during World War II, I think it's about 300,000 Indians flee for their life. This is a photograph of my friend Sanveer's grandfather, bottom left. And this is the last photograph. The grandfather would later become the first Sikh model for Moss Bros, the clothing company. But this is the last photograph of his family before they are forced to flee Burma, the last photo ever taken of the Sikh community of Bordwin in Shan State, Burma. It's the largest known migration of World War II at the time.
You would have to go a little faster.
Sure. The second of the 5 partitions is the partition of Arabia. This bit, and this bit is definitely the bit that I think has generated the most surprise amongst people I've chatted to about the book. And there's a remarkable amount of continuity. Many of the Arab sheikdoms marry into the Hyderabadi royal family, for example. This is the origin of Halim, an Indo-Arabian dish. And it's actually separated off around the same time as Burma because, again, it's not part of Bharatvarsh. And there's actually a fascinating little anecdote from one of the British legations in Tehran saying, it was with surprising unanimity that government officials said that they had absolutely no interest in running the Persian Gulf states after we were gone. And thus, the entire Persian Gulf is separated off. Of course, these could have been two of the most prominent moments in South Asian history if it wasn't for the central moment of South Asian history, the Great Partition of 1947. I don't need to go into the origins. I'm sure everyone here knows the background of this. But I think it's worth mentioning that the man who first creates the word Pakistan, Ramnath Choudhary, who creates the map on the right, justifies the creation of Pakistan on the basis that if Burma is to be separated, why can't the Muslims of India also separate? This, of course, turns violent in August 1946 in the streets of Kolkata. And what's remarkable is how sudden the partition is announced. So in June, it's announced that India and Pakistan are going to be divided along religious lines. A Muslim and a Hindu majority state are going to be established from what remains of the Raj. And this is a map from July 1947, 1 month before independence, and it's still unclear which country Delhi, Kolkata, and Shimla are going to be part of. This, of course, leads to the division of assets and the largest forced migration in human history. Between 12 to 15 million people are forced to migrate in the course of a few months. 1 to 3 million people never make it to the other side. And I'm sure over half of the people in this audience will have family members who made this great migration. It lives with us to this day. Another of the rather surprising things, though, that I think has surprised a lot of people when talking about the book is the fact that the map that Cyril Radcliffe, this British lawyer who's never been east of Paris, is put in charge of drawing the boundary between these two new republics. What I think people often miss is the fact that he is put in charge of dividing British India along religious lines. Muslim majority regions are going to go to Pakistan. Hindu and Sikh majority regions are going to go to India. But he doesn't touch the princely states. And of course, here in Jaipur, we're in a former princely state. And this was not touched by Radcliffe. This is the map on this image. This is a map that I've basically taken from the front cover of the Hindu newspaper. This is what India and Pakistan look like on Independence Day. And most of the princely states are integrated at a later date. These 565 princely states. And the fourth partition of my book is how these 565 princely states are corralled into either India or Pakistan or Burma. Again, 25 states joined Burma, and that's not a story that we often talk about. And of course, how some states, notably Nepal and Bhutan, assert their right to independence. And why does Nepal exist today as an independent state, but not Kashmir, not Hyderabad, not Jaipur? Here are the princes. And it would lead to 3 major conflicts in the year, which we can again go into more in our Q&A. But Hyderabad, Balochistan, and Kashmir, these are 3 places that erupt into violence very quickly over disputes about whether or not these states joined the right country, whether everyone within these princely states approved of the country that these states were kind of cajoled into joining. By 1950, by the time that the first war over Kashmir comes to an end, the map of the subcontinent roughly resembles the map that we're used to today. The key difference, of course, being that what now reads Bangladesh on the map was then read East Pakistan. And the final of the 5 partitions I talk about in this book is the partition of Pakistan itself on essentially ethnic lines. Pakistan, the idea of Pakistan, the Muslim League party that asserts the creation of Pakistan, was actually founded in Dhaka, founded in modern Pakistan. And right through the 1950s, there is this hope that these 2 halves of Pakistan, separated by thousands of kilometers, could merge into a single national identity. Notably, 4 of the first 8 prime ministers of Pakistan are of Bengali extraction, are from East Pakistan. This is the first, Khwaja Nazimuddin, the first, basically, prime minister who today we'd consider Bangladeshi, but one of the first prime ministers of a united Pakistan. And of course, here on the right is one of the early coins of a united Pakistan, featuring both Urdu and Bangla. The thing that changes everything is it's gradual, the disillusionment that breaks out in Bangladesh First, there's an attempt to sort of suppress the Bangla language. And then in particular, I think far more important is the military coup that occurs. Because at the time when the first military coup happens in Pakistan in the late 1950s, only 2% of the military came from East Pakistan. And so essentially what you have is, with the military coup, the entire political class from what's now Bangladesh is pushed out of government. Right. And very quickly, you get people saying that colonialism never ended and that we are now a colony of West Pakistan. This man, Mujibur Rahman, creates a movement for more autonomy. But when he wins an election in Pakistan in 1970, the military refuses to hand over power. There's a massive crackdown. The military goes in, rounding up members of the Awami League, shooting up students in Dhaka University associated with this political party. And very quickly, complete war breaks out in what becomes Bangladesh. The death toll remains rather unknown. Bangladesh claims 3 million are killed, 3 million Bengalis are killed over the next 9 months. Pakistan claims it was just 30,000. These are drastically different numbers, and ultimately we have no way of knowing. But what we do know is that in the course of just 9 months, 10 million Pakistani refugees become refugees in India and Burma. That is 1 in 12 Pakistani civilians becomes a refugee in the year 1971. And eventually, that November and December, India firstly gradually begins backing the Mukti Bahini rebels seeking an independent Bangladesh. And by December, it's all-out war. It's what I call the Great South Asian War, because it's the first time that there are distinct Indian, Pakistani, and Bangladeshi militaries all fighting with one another. India finally gets to Dhaka in late 1971, and this image is the signing into existence of Bangladesh as the 12th nation state to emerge from what was once one Indian empire. Thank you.
Wow, that was a fascinating...
Quick stop talk.
Yeah, please give a big hand for Sam Dalrymple, people. Wow. All right, my first question, Sam, would be, if it were not for shattered lands, what would present-day Asia look like? Because towards the end of your book, you do hint about the possibility of an pan-Asian federation of sorts. But is that even possible in this mind-bogglingly diverse landmass of people and communities and castes and religions and geographies?
So I think this is the crux of the question, right? Is ultimately everyone was aware at the time in 1920s that the Raj was a massive imperial creation stretching from Yemen to Burma and including 1/4 of humanity. This was quite clearly not going to work as a single nation state. Yeah. But I think that even as late as the early 1950s, both Nehru and Aung San and U Nu, the early founding fathers of Burma, were still holding out for a kind of United States of South Asia, was what they called it, a kind of federal system a bit similar to the United States of America, which, had it happened, would have probably been a massive global superpower. I think that a lot of Emiratis that I speak with suggest that had Dubai and the Gulf remained a part of India or Pakistan after independence, that may have led to a kind of pseudo-colonial system where the massive populations of India would have completely swamped the region, but they wouldn't have had the political rights that they do today. And I feel like that makes sense to me. But so I don't think it would have necessarily been an amazing thing for everything to remain united, but to have the most severe borders in this region, carving apart communities that have lived together for generations, is clearly ridiculous. And this project, in a sense, began from conversations I had with my friend Sparsh, who's in the audience here.
Oh, really?
The strangeness that it was only really in Britain, India's former colonizer, that we could sit together as a Brit, an Indian, a Pakistani, and a Bangladeshi, all having conversations with one another, and how ridiculous it is that we can't have these conversations in the subcontinent itself.
Right. Wow, so this must have been a logistical nightmare, a book like this, while reading the book and now, looking at your presentation. Was it a bit of a logistical nightmare? And I want to I want you to sum up the making of this book, as in how many years did it take, where all did you travel, who all did you interview, what kind of sources, but in a very brief, and some of the weird and the tube light moments of the book.
No, so it was definitely, I tried to go to all of the countries involved. I very much have a thing against armchair writing. I like to kind of go to a place and ask people in the area. So I used languages did interviews in about 6 different languages.
Right.
Everything from Burmese to Hindi, Tamil, Bangla, Arabic, etc. There's my friend Harleen, who's also in the audience, helped translate some Punjabi diaries for the book. And then I used archives in India, Britain, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, and then private archives in the other countries. So Pakistan, for example, I couldn't get into the archives as a scholar, but I ended up managing to get in contact with the family of Sarfaroz Khan Noon, who was the last democratically elected Pakistani prime minister before the first coup.
Right.
He's the prime minister who arranged Gwadar, the port city in what's now Balochistan. He bought it from the Omani government because, again, it was an Omani city at the time. And what was fascinating was they had whole reams of government documents sitting in their house that they wanted scholars to look at, but they didn't know how to get the scholars interested, kind of thing. And they had on their desk the letter that ends Pakistani democracy, where Iskandar Mirza sends a letter saying, "My dear sir, it's the politest coup of all time." It's a letter that reads something along the lines of, "My dear Sir Farouz, I'm so sorry, but I now have to, abruptly end democracy, cancel parliamentary procedure, kind of, arrest half the opposition and calm everything down. My only upset is that you, of all people, were the leader at the time." To which Sarfaroz Khan Noon replies, "My dear Iskandar Mirza, I'm so sorry that you've had to take over government, abolish parliamentary procedure and institute military rule. My only upset is that you had to be the one to do this." And so it's this kind of strange interaction that I've not seen published anywhere else before, but they had in their house. And, I think so much of this book emerged not from the government archives, although a lot did, but from objects that people had in their houses, diaries.
Private archives.
Private archives,
Right, fascinating. Okay, from Pakistan, I want to come to Burma again. One of the most striking things in your book is how you trace right-wing Buddhism in Burma, sometimes inspired rather bizarrely by the Nazis. And you trace it back to the 1920s, Sam. Now, most of us know a thing or two about right-wing Buddhism, but I always thought that right-wing Buddhism is a thing of late 20th century, in Sri Lanka or in Burma. So could you talk very briefly about how this current emerged, and why it has proved so enduring? I mean, we continue to have, as we sit and speak, Rohingya crisis right now.
No, so it's fascinating also how much early Buddhist nationalist writings in Burma go on to impact Hindu nationalist writings a decade later in India, because they were part of the same colony at the time, because they were neighboring provinces, Bengal and Burma. As I mentioned, Uottama was Savarkar's predecessor at the Hindu Mahasabha. And there's a huge amount of interactions between early Buddhist politics in Burma and the Nazis. In fact, U Saw, the villain of the piece, who basically campaigns to have... He tries to establish a racially pure Burma in the 1930s on the basis of what Hitler's doing with the Jews. He sees that very happily and wants to do the same basically to the Tamils, and writes quite openly about that. He's trying to make Burma ethnically pure again, kind of thing. And he sees the Indian immigration into Burma under the Raj as the source of all of Burma's problems. In order to get rid of them. So it's perhaps notable that when the Rohingya genocide happened recently, one of the slurs used against the Rohingya was Chetty, the Tamil Chettiars.
Oh, wow.
Because they were the source of a lot of animosity in 1930s Burma. And so he does a bunch of things. One, he starts campaigning that foreigners need to be sent back. He creates a list of non-indigenous communities that need to be forcibly kicked out of the country. What's interesting is he also invents a number of terms that we're quite used to hearing about today, such as, for example, love jihad, the concept of which is now often invoked in kind of, Hindu nationalist circles to talk about the kind of threat of Muslims marrying families and converting them to Islam, and gradual demographic change. That has its origins in 1930s Burmese politics and enters the language of Hindu nationalism from Burma. So there's all sorts of interesting linkages between Burma. And also, likewise, the fact that Gandhi's salt satyagraha that occurs in 1931, it's not just Hindu nationalism, Buddhist nationalism, it's also Congress. You know, one of the largest Congress chapters was the Congress chapter of Rangoon. And the guy who funds the Salt March, I visited his house in Yangon in January, and it's still there. And likewise, you know, Burma shows up periodically in our history books here. We hear about it most notably with Subhas Chandra Bose, and I think he, as well as all the reasons that we know him to be important, is hugely important in World War II, because when he arrives in Burma to set up the Indian National Army, to set up an anti-British Indian army during World War II, siding with Japan, he is the person who stops the Indian pogroms. And I think that that is another legacy of Bose that isn't talked about enough here. The anti-Indian pogroms are going on from about 1939 until Bose arrives, and he helps change the mood, change the political mood, so that Indians are suddenly free to walk around Yangon again after he arrives.
All right, from the Buddhist right, I'll come to Hindu right. While researching my Vajpayee biography, one of the most bizarre discoveries I made was that a princely state like Gwalior, which was a bit like a mini Hindutva republic in the by the 30s, did not want to join the Indian Union. It took me a long time to wrap my head around why this was so, that a very pro-Hindu princely state did not want to join India in the summer of 1947. Just imagine that. And in fact, even more startling was that Vajpayee's own family did not want to join the Indian Union. They wanted to be with the Maharaja, and they wanted, they would have dreamt of a sovereign for themselves. Your book shows that Gwalior was not the only one, that even a Hindu state like Travancore did not want to, and so many other states did not want to join the Union. So what was it? Was it their fear of loss of power, influence, wealth? Was it the sudden opportunism of, becoming a sovereign state with the lapse of paramountcy? Was it something else, or was it a mix of all of these things, Sam?
I think the princely states remain one of the most under-researched parts of modern Indian history. Far too often we focus purely on what's going on in British India and leave out the 1/3 of the subcontinent that was not under direct British rule. And I think it's consistently surprising how much independent visions of nation states existed. I think there's no doubt that everyone, Indian nationalism was widespread across the country, but having had this massive amount of autonomy being in a princely state under the Raj, I think many princely states assumed that sort of, autonomy and independent identity could continue into the future. And so I think that we often look at history teleologically, as if, it was always destined to go in one direction. We were always destined to reach the end point that we have today, where, we have these borders and Pakistan has those borders. And we miss out on the contingency of so much of it. I think what struck me is how it wasn't just one or two. Today, when you read a lot of history books, they talk about, the few rogue states that might not have wanted to join the Indian Union and that needed to be cajoled by Sardar Patel.
Or beaten up. Beaten up sometimes.
Into basically kind of merging with the Indian Union. Hence why Sardar Patel, for those sort of foreigners who don't know about Sardar Patel's statue, as a result of unifying the princely states into India, is now the largest statue on planet Earth, I believe. In Gujarat. It's
by a huge margin.
Yeah, it's kind of 4 times the size of the Statue of Liberty. So what surprised me was how commonplace princely nationalisms were. You know, you had, in Meghalaya, you had the Khasi states that were neither Hindu nor Muslim. And they were often animist or Christian. And they imagined that they were going to kind of continue in that direction for years to come. Travancore in what's now Kerala made a long bid for independence, as did, I think, of the border states bordering Pakistan, I think that is Jodhpur, Jaisalmer, Kutch, and Bikaner. Bikaner was the only one ahead of time to announce that it was definitely going to join the Indian Union.
Right.
Both Jaisalmer and Jodhpur negotiate with Pakistan to see what deal they could get if they joined Pakistan. Now imagine if Jodhpur and Jaisalmer were part of modern-day Pakistan. It would be a very different lifestyle, and that very almost happens.
Yeah.
Jodhpur's Maharaja is considering it until his right-hand man says, go and consult your mother. And so he goes back to Jodhpur and is basically ticked off by his mother and says, hell no, you're not doing that. We have today the documents of the negotiations and the potential deal that Jodhpur was going to have by joining Pakistan. And there's an amazing Pakistani scholar called Yaqub Bangash, who's done a lot of work on Pakistan's negotiations with the princely states. And, you know, it's one of the great what-ifs of Indian history. Likewise, Manipur in the northeast negotiates with the Burmese government to see what deal it could get if it joined Burma.
Right.
Today, we know what the Indian Union looks like, and so we rarely question how the other directions it could have gone.
Right. Okay, now coming to the third great partition, the Great Partition of India in August 47. You mentioned briefly in the book that Jinnah has a more enduring legacy than other founding fathers, like certainly Gandhi, Nehru, but also someone like Aung San. It's a quick question, but why is that? Why do you think so?
I think that...
I think you've quoted Stanley Wolpert, but I just wanted to know your opinion.
I think that Jinnah was definitely the figure that surprised me the most, the founder of Pakistan, who in the 1920s is considered the leading congressman in the country. Again, we never see him in the list of freedom fighters in the kind of, you know, Azadi Ki Senani.
Right.
Jinnah is never there today, but if you ask anyone in the 1910s who is the most prominent freedom fighter in India, they would have all said Jinnah. Right. Jinnah is called by Sarojini Naidu the greatest ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity as late as the 1930s. And of course, by 1947, he has founded the first Islamic republic in world history.
Right.
I think the reason why I say that his legacy is most enduring is that having divided the country along religious lines, I would say that, you know, the Great Partition of India in 1947 remains the central moment of world history for 1/4 of the world's population. It's the prism of violence through which people perceive their past, present, and future, not just in the subcontinent as well, but also, you know, increasingly as the conflict between India and Pakistan went global over subsequent decades.
Right.
As India, for example, which until this point, there's a brilliant book at this festival, Imran Mullah's Indian Caliphate, which makes the very convincing argument that India, as late as the 1930s, was still considered the most prominent Islamic country in world history.
Right.
And the fact that India isn't even on the kind of Global Islamic Council today is a legacy of partition. The fact that, you know, 3/4 of Delhi's family, 3/4 of Delhi's population are families that came over at partition. It's the legacy of displacement, the legacies of the furies unleashed at partition, I would say, create a legacy that is far more enduring than any other figure in 20th century South Asian history.
Fair enough. I think we are running short of time, so I'll ask you one last question, Sam. And as an archive hound, I have also been grappling with this. Tell me something. How much of history is a history of being fooled by randomness? And people like Sam Dalrymple and Abhishek Choudhary afterwards imposing neat logics, you know. When Ambedkar wrote his Pakistan book in 1941, soon after Muslim League passed the Lahore Resolution of 1940, he had no clue at all that someday Kashmir would become the flashpoint and probably the most important, most enduring point of discord between India and Pakistan, but it has only 6 years later. And you write in some detail about how Cyril Radcliffe was made the chairman of the boundary commissions because he's never traveled east of Paris. So do you think some of history is a history of being fooled by randomness?
I think that for sure there's a lot of randomness involved, but I think the way I often view it is that there are these sliding doors moments. There are years when things could go in any direction, but then there's that sliding door moment where suddenly history is set irreconcilably on a certain path, and now the history is set, and having been for years things could have gone in any direction, and suddenly there is this kind of deterministic moment.
Right.
I see it, for example, with India and Pakistan's partition. I think that before Direct Action Day, before 1946 August, things really could have gone in any direction. Jinnah, in July 1946, was actively proposing the argument that Pakistan could exist as part of a greater Indian federation, for example. By November 1946, that was no longer possible for a variety of reasons that I go into the book. So there are these sliding doors moments. Again, I think that the creation of Bangladesh I don't see as inevitable from Pakistan until the Pakistani army launches Operation Searchlight in March 1971, when the crackdown happens, when the massacres begin. Before that, I think that there genuinely could have been some diplomatic resolution to the discord between the eastern and western wings. But after March 1971, I don't think that there was any possibility of going back. So there are these sliding doors moments, it would be my answer.
Right. I think I should open the floor for some questions. Do we have enough time?
Yes, I think we can do
how many? But I have only one request. Please don't make comments. Just ask brief, pointed questions. Sam is going to be at JLF for all 5 days. So if you have comments, ask off stage. Yes, sir. Gentleman there with the cap. Yes. Please, someone pass him the mic. Sir, only questions, no comments, please.
Okay. My quick question to Sam is that we have grown up thinking of partition as being mainly Punjab and Bengal, and there was so much going on from Aden to Burma, and bits and pieces were written, but no one wrote such a comprehensive history of 12 nations coming out of one nation. So is this again, as Abhishek was saying, randomness, or was there a conspiracy or a reason to hide this history so that we don't talk of Yemen and Aden and
all right.
Dubai?
Brilliant question, thank you. So part yes, part no is what I'll say. So particularly the Arabian frontier of the Raj was explicitly kept off maps of the Raj so that basically Britain didn't end up in a diplomatic dispute with the Ottoman Empire first and later Saudi Arabia, because the borders about how far into the deserts of Arabia the Raj extended remained always a matter of dispute. And as a result of not being able to show how far inland these states went, they'd preferred to keep them off the maps altogether. That is why people don't see the Arabian states there. What's remarkable, though, is that Burma is on all the maps of the Raj that we've grown up with, but remarkably few people have integrated that. And I don't think that that is a conspiracy. I think that that is more to do with the fact that Burma, thanks to years of civil war and thanks to the crackdown on Burmese intellectuals in that country and the closing off of its archives for decades, Burma has kind of vanished from the kind of global view in some sense. Despite having been the New York of its day, we barely perceive it. And I think that's more to do with the civil war in Burma and the lack of interactions between Burma and India today. And I think it was best put by the great scholar who's actually here at the festival, and you should go to the talk of, Thant Min Oo, who writes that, when he went to Delhi for the first time, he found it bizarre because he was told that there were no Burmese-speaking academics in Delhi. And, often you had families who had kept Burmese recipes within the family, or whose family had worked in Rangoon back in the day, or in Akyab, or in Monwa, or wherever it might be. But, there was little understanding of Burmese politics. And I think that's more to do with the fact that, I think people in northeast India often do know about Burma because the same neglect of Northeast Indian history, I think, extends everything further east than Bangladesh,
Okay,
I would say. Thank you.
Gentleman in the middle row. Yes, sir. Please. But keep it brief, please. Yeah.
I didn't. You mentioned about Radcliffe. I didn't hear anything about this whole problem between Pakistan and Afghanistan of the Pashtuns as a result of the line that he's created. Would you be writing about that later on?
Brilliant question. So the story that I chose, the way I see it, that there are two types of border disputes that have kind of broken out in South Asian history. One are borders created within the Raj that were tend to have been created as the British imperialism was crumbling in the region. So like the partition of British India that, saw former bits of British India on both sides of the border. The borders of Pakistan, Afghanistan, the borders of India and China, and the borders of Burma and Thailand are all legacies of the opposite, which are the frontiers of British power. This is kind of where the British stuck in and the edge of British power. And often they are completely random, to do with some frontier post that the British established in some war in the 19th century. And of course, the British conquered half of Pashtun territory, but not all of Pashtun territory, and that's why that border emerged. Currently, that's not my next project, and I'm mulling over various projects. I've not yet picked one, but it's not currently my next focus. But thank you
All right,
for that.
one last question. The Princeton scholar in the second row. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Sam. As somebody from the UAE, I'm glad somebody provoked that conversation in Arabia, where we're now grappling with this history for a very long time we haven't been to.
Thank you.
And in Gwadar, I interviewed a gentleman who actually witnessed the partition and sale of Gwadar, and he said, we slept as Omanis and woke up as Pakistanis. They sold us like sheep and goats, and we were not asked what we want.
Right.
And this is very important, that people were not involved in all of these histories, right? They weren't asked. My question is about not just shattered lands, but what about shattered oceans? What about the Indians in Zanzibar and Mombasa? What about Maldives and Lakhdave? What about Lanka and the Tamil Nadu? What about the ocean in this story, and how do you think about it in this history?
Brilliant question, thank you. The story that I chose to try and tell was the story of how basically one British Indian passport became 12 passports. And that's the basic story. So in the wake of World War I, anyone from Aden to Rangoon is eligible for an Indian passport. By today, there are 12 passports in that region. Now, there are all sorts of countries that were part of British India, and that also involved the East India Company. So the way that these boundaries were formed was not on the basis of national identity. It was places that had been conquered by the East India Company. Of course, the East India Company had conquered a range of other places like Sri Lanka, like Hong Kong, like Singapore, like Zanzibar, but they were separated off earlier in its history. They tended to have been separated off in either the 18th or 19th centuries and made into separate crown colonies. Sri Lanka, for example, is separated off, I think, in 1798 and made into a separate crown colony. The Maldives, a similar story. Zanzibar, which had been part of the Omani Empire when Britain first gets involved in Oman, is separated off around the same time. I think it's the 18th century. And as a result, no one in these places is ever eligible for an Indian passport. And that was, there are all sorts of stories of connectivity driven by empire that is later shattered with the creation of nation states. But the story that I was telling was already, in a sense, so vast that I chose this as the limits. How did one passport turn into 12 passports? But thank you for the question.
All right, we're completely out of time. Thank you, people, for attending the session. Please give a big hand one last time for Sam Dalrymple. And there are copies of Shattered Lands. If you haven't purchased a copy yet, please buy and get it signed right now. Okay, thank you so much.
I also want to quickly give a shout out to the greatest book, both on Prime Minister Vajpayee and also on the rise of Hindu nationalism, which is Abhishek's brilliant Vajpayee biography. Thank you.